Even with higher production in 2016, the USDA believes cash receipts from corn this year will fall more than $800 million. Cash income from corn sales has dropped dramatically over the past few years, with 2016's forecast expected to be about 36% lower than the record high farmers set in 2012. With that in mind, some growers may be weighing the potential return of certain inputs. Earlier this week, we talked with Nebraska Extension's Charles Shapiro on Nebraska Innovation Campus to discuss what producers should think about when deciding on the use of nutrients this growing season.
Well, the ones that they can control are the most important ones that they need to deal with this year. And with low crop prices, corn specifically, and me being a soil specialist, I'm going to talk about fertilizer prices and making those decisions.
Is there something specific that goes into weighing the costs of the potential returns that you might get from these?
Well, we have to know who owns the land and what kind of long-term interest you have in the land. So for some of the nutrients that may stick around more than 1 or 2 years, then you might not want to be fertilizing for the next renter 2 or 3 years down the road. That would be most likely your phosphorus decision or liming, whereas you want to keep getting high yields. So you have to balance the short-term yields with the long-term investment.
Let's talk about some nutrients specifically. Let's start with nitrogen. If your costs are going to be tight this year, or if your profits are going to be really tight this year, what comes into play when you think about using nitrogen?
Well, the one thing that people always mention when they talk about nitrogen is the insurance costs. They say, I know the university recommends X, but I'm going to go X plus 25. And then maybe your agronomist gives you the X plus 25, and then you're the farmer and says, well, the agronomist says 175, I'm going to add another 25. So you don't want to be doubly insured. We have a very good extension circular on corn fertility issues. Use our recommendation as a base. It takes into account a lot of credits that people don't usually always take into account, like the soybean credit, manure, irrigation water, all those things that we talk about many times over the last 30 years. Now's the time to put it to action.
What are the situations where you might be more apt to lose nitrogen?
We don't want to lose nitrogen, and the way to avoid that is to have split applications. So if it's possible, you'd put a little bit on early, and then you would go through either the pivot or side dress. What we don't like to see in no-till is nitrogen sitting on the surface. So if we get a ½ of rain shortly after that, there are inhibitors that help with that. So if you want to keep your nitrogen costs down, we have to think about split applications.
What about phosphorus as you start to think about this year, Charles?
Phosphorus is a really good example of a nutrient that can be there this year, could be there next year, 2 or 3 years down the road. So it's one of the ones where we could postpone and maybe put 2 years on at once. Right now, since corn is kind of cheap, you may not want to put on phosphorus this year, but you have to go and have a soil test, and you have to know what your soil levels are. If they're low, you need to put on phosphorus. But if you've built up above our critical level, which is in the NEB guides, then you probably could skip a year, because it doesn't go from very, very high to very low in 1 year. It's a very slow, gentle decline. And once you're above the critical level, you're not going to be losing very much yield.
You had also mentioned lime. What are the pH levels where you would kind of want to see it in?
Okay, there's maybe a little bit of variation in the state, because part of our state has high pH soils below. But if your soils are below 5.3 for corn, we know you're probably going to get some yield loss. It takes a while for the soils to increase. If you put lime out this year, probably won't get to what you want until next year. For all the nutrients to work best, we need to have the right pH. So you should check your lime, and generally the leases have some kind of provision. If you lime it now and you leave 2 years later, you get some of your money back.
On the Market Journal website, you can find a link to more resources on UNL's recommendations for fertilizer and nutrient applications.